Hello and welcome to another episode of Fractional Impact. Today we're speaking to Mike Terlizzi, who helps early stage B2B tech companies launch with clarity and story. We'll be going into what tech founders get wrong about go-to-market planning, strategy, and execution, why outside perspective often uncovers a startup's real differentiator, and how to create a simple message and why that can accelerate adoption and acquisition. Mike, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Mike Terlizzi. I spent the first part of my career working in television story production, and now I work in marketing and found a way to combine the two. And I live in Boston currently.
Awesome. And we're joined as well by Gianna Maliari from the Fractional Clients team. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Gianna.
Hi, I'm Gianna, as Stuart said, and I handle all things sales and client delivery along with Stuart and the team at Fractional Clients, and I'm super excited to get into this with Mike today.
Fantastic. So my first question for you, Mike, so that everyone listening can get a deeper sense of who you are and what you've done. Tell us about all of your experience and what you've been doing over the last few years.
Like career experience, it's a little out there. So yeah, like I said, I started off like playing jazz piano and working in story production in Los Angeles, and I wanted to return home to Boston, which is really far away. So I had to get an MBA because I figured out people don't really know what we do in TV outside of TV, but they know what an MBA is. So it opened some doors, and I moved back home and just sort of, worked my way through the non-television world at Deloitte and some other places, and along the way brought some early stage tech companies to market, and sort of found that was sort of came naturally to me. So, and it helped me use all the things I'd learned in production as well as in the business school and marketing, and sort of combine them to something cohesive.
Yeah, I think going from TV and film production and that whole world going into B2B tech, it's not a transition that you hear very often. What made you make that happen?
Well, I definitely didn't plan on it. It just sort of, when I was in business school, my first year, I helped someone launch their e-commerce company, and then later on worked at this enterprise security company. And I wasn't sure, I kind of went in a little bit nervous because I had never worked in tech or anything. But the guy running it, the CEO, said, "No, I need someone who doesn't work in tech," because he said, "I've been doing this too long to know that the product itself is not going to move the needle. We need something really like a cohesive message to bring into the different stakeholders who don't understand tech. So I need someone like you who can, create a video out of, can think strategically." So, it worked, and it just I didn't know what to say because he was right, and we both had faith in each other's ability. We both had an agreement about what should be a go-to-market message, even though we came from very different backgrounds, and it ended up working out really well, and I really enjoyed it. So it gave me hope that I could actually use, like, the things I learned before business school weren't going to be just castaway skills that I never really used again. So that was nice. Yeah, that was sort of how, I guess I just like to say I kind of fell into it, because I kind of did. It was just a matter of networking and meeting people and telling them about, my experiences. And it sort of helped, that helped a lot, because it got me to have these conversations. And someone eventually said, "Well, if you can do the strategy part and you know how to film and produce, could you do both?" And I said, "Well, sure, give it a try." And it worked out pretty well.
Yeah. Do you think the whole TV and film production world experience gives you kind of a unique perspective or a unique angle when you're working with tech companies?
I think it does, in a sense that I think as I've learned it sort of my own way and worked at companies who maybe do it in traditional ways, what I offer is the ability to first off, just practically speaking, production-wise, knowing how budgets work, knowing how, what cameras to use. I know how to edit. I know how to do the sound and everything. So I find that just by not charging ridiculous fees for things that clients don't need, there alone saves like $50,000 in production budgets. So yeah, I think the ability to to bring sort of an idea to life visually has been very helpful, especially for B2B tech, not so much B2C where the user is probably more sophisticated, but B2B where you really have to win over a whole panel of people with a very simple, interesting message. And that was the job in TV, was to create interesting content that people would watch and keep watching and not stop watching. If you couldn't do that, you weren't going to last very long. And very rarely was that audience me. I made a lot of shows and a lot of TV, a lot of movies and stuff that I would never watch, but other people would. So it definitely helped with like understanding an audience and looking at the competition and creating something a little different. And so far a little more effective.
Yeah. Because you mentioned there about sort of managing budgets and cutting costs and stuff like that, and I know that that's one of the areas of focus you have, especially kind of positioning yourself as an alternative to hiring a lot of agencies. You've said you deliver the work of several agencies, but just as one person. How does that look in practice? Like, how do you, as one person, do what potentially multiple agencies would be doing?
Well, I look at it more as I give them a sort of a founding message and something that they can work off of as they go forward. So it starts off with strictly the strategy. So looking at a lot of research, a lot of collaboration between client and me on what I do my own takeaways, come in and really collaborate to find they answer my questions, and I have a whole process. It takes about 6 weeks to find a really good, unique position that's differentiated. And then once you do the positioning and you figure out where your product exists relative to everything else, make the appropriate trade-offs that go into a good strategy. A lot of times people look at it as a checklist, but it's really a matter of trade-offs. Like if you want to offer this, then you have to not offer some other things. Otherwise, you're offering everything to everyone, and you just don't come across as authentic, or people just don't believe it, or it's just bad segmentation. But once that's done, and you can say, okay, here's a strong positioning statement, which I look at as sort of a log line to a movie, in that a log line to a movie is when you read the script, you then have to do coverage, which includes a summary that's pages long, character arcs, all that stuff, your own notes, but then you have to do a log line. It's the hardest part of the whole thing because it's just 2 sentences that encapsulates the whole script. So a positioning statement, I think, is similar to that, in that it just positions your product. It tells, what you need to know, this product relative to the competition can do these things different, and that's better because of these particular things. So it helps you find the right audience for your product, so you're not selling everything to everyone, and the right message to let them know that, you do understand their problems with, whatever software they have or whatever problem they're trying to solve. And you can, by showing that sort of empathy, that takes the strategy, and then the video part, I sort of do that shifts to, it's more me, and then I go to them for approvals. And it's a matter of, again, I work with the engineers, work with everyone at the company, and really foster their creativity. And oftentimes they'll come up with interesting ideas that I then refine. So I really leverage, their expertise, my expertise, and my not being in the weeds with them every day on it, to give them sort of an outsider perspective and say, well, the competition all says this, and they use these words and this sort of tone. Is that what you're going for? Or do you want to differentiate that way? Because there's a lot of different ways to differentiate other than the product. There's what you say, how you say it, the tone you use, the music, all sorts of things. So, but yeah, it's worked well with B2B tech a lot because we come from such different worlds, and so we can literally leverage each other's experiences and inexperiences to get something that's really quite different. Because if I've done just tech my whole life, then probably going to create a product that looks like tech and other tech marketing, which is oftentimes says the same things or says a lot of things without saying one thing.
Yeah. And I'm sure anyone listening could maybe be thinking, well, if I hired Mike, for example, instead of working with multiple agencies, yes, it would be a huge cost saving, but what damage would it do to the quality of my marketing or things like that? How do you bring those savings in, bring the costs down without impacting the quality of the go-to-market strategy or anything like that you're involved in?
Well, the go-to-market strategy is often the work of maybe one or two, people, it depends on how you define strategy. I'm thinking of it from like, you are going from zero, maybe you have a few customers, but you're going to market. Like you're basically, opening your premiere show, you're introducing yourself. And what I do is really hone down on the most important things. Quality, I guess, the quality of the strategy is very subjective. The quality of the video, on the other hand, I can definitively say is not going to suffer, because all I need is a good cinematographer, which is just the person who does the lights. That's where you get a good glossy look to a film, is because of the lights person. So that's the only hire I have to make. I don't, a lot of people don't know that when you shoot a video, you're hiring the cinematographer, you're also hiring their equipment, and they can charge you for all sorts of equipment that you don't know you don't need. So I can look at the cameras and say, well, you don't need those 8, you really just need this one. And we don't need to shoot in a city. We can shoot in a town, just a matter of blocking, framing, being resourceful. When you get a budget, especially in film, you can either get a little bit crazy or you can get a little bit lazy. And a lot of people go for lazy. I opt for crazy, see how much you can get out of these dollars. And, a lot of people, I show them stuff I'll make, and they say, how much do you think that costs? They say like 40 or 50,000, but it really only costs 10. Because I can do most of the labor, but also because I'm not going, like, the whole point is I'm sensitive to early stage company budgets, but I want to give them access to enterprise stage quality. That's my whole, that's sort of the gift I want to give, is like, you don't have to, and a lot of times they learn, there's like, oh, we don't have to do those. How come we had to do them last time? Like, because you were getting ripped off. but I'll come and show how it doesn't have to be that way. And I, in the strategy part, I think it's important to keep your strategy and your creative as tight, like marketing and sales, you're really working together. So if they can be, it's not just me. I tend to subcontract out other strategists or other people for their input. So it's not, just me.
Yeah.
How do you reassure founders at that stage that you're not sacrificing quality by maintaining that lower budget?
Just show them previous work, or explain to them the process, and ask what. First, I'd like to get a good definition of how they define strategy. So I want to make sure it's not just tactics. It's not just a podcast and 3 emails a week and all these things. Like, well, those are good tactics, but what is your strategy? What is going to inform those tactics? And if they don't have one, I just start with very simple questions. Like I have those 5 big questions I always ask. Why did you make this? i.e., what is the problem it solves? Why should anyone buy it? i.e., is the problem worth solving? Why is it better than what they have? And then the key part is, why does that difference make it better? And why should anyone care? So I take care of that anyone care part, but that part, it's deceivingly simple to say, why'd you make it? Why should people buy? But it starts these long conversations where you start to get to the heart of, like, so you made it because of this problem people are having, or these 2 problems people are having. Are they aware they have them? A lot of times the hardest thing is to solve a problem people don't know they have, because then you can't do any solution selling. You have to really make them aware of the problem, and it can be more of a process. The best ones are people who are aware of a problem and really don't like anything that they have. Those are the best opportunities, because they know they have a problem, they're looking for something better, and if you can offer it, and it actually works, then you're in good. But no one's going to care if you don't say what you need to say in a way that actually interests them. It's not just more features or more facts or more promises, because they've had enough of those.
Makes sense.
And with your experience in kind of launching B2B tech products into markets, a lot of markets now are crowded, just because there's so much competition, and it's pretty tough to find a market that isn't crowded in many ways. What do you think are the most common mistakes that founders make when they're launching into crowded markets?
They focus on things like features, and they focus on, they fall prey to the B2B. The second B doesn't stand for building, and oftentimes they approach it like the other party is rational and logical and making decisions purely based on these facts and logic, because it's a business. But at the end of the day, a business is just people, and people are not logical and not rational. Consumers often will buy and do things, and they don't really know why. They do them. It's we're more emotional based than we like to admit. And whether or not that's B2B, B2B, the human element it's even more wild than in B2C, I think, because you're dealing with many people. And, when people get together in a group, they tend not to become more logical or more rational. They tend to become more irrational. And things like politics and all sorts of things that you as a vendor can't influence or impact go on behind closed doors as a business. And so by keeping their message very simple, it allows everyone at the table to get it, and everyone knows everyone got it. And so if there are detractors, if there are politics or whatever going on between people at the business, it's much harder to, for instance, if someone's job is to procure software, but the lead comes in from outside that person's department, they don't really care if it's better. It just didn't come from them. And that alone may give them a target for the whole project to go down, just because, again, people, politics, it's natural defense mechanisms. So if you can disarm them by creating something unexpectedly offbeat or unexpectedly, just odd, something that they haven't seen before in this market, said a different way, that tends to kind of get their attention. Again, is the first step in generating interest, is create something interesting. Don't just create another SaaS video with the same looking website and graphics and language as every other, promising, I'm not even sure half the time what they're promising, efficiency across departments or something. Okay, what exactly does that mean? So just getting right to it and saying, this is your problem, this is the solution, here's what it has that other people don't, and find a way to say that where you're not just telling these facts. You have to show them so that it's simple and clear to everyone in the room immediately.
Yeah, how is that done in practice? Because you're saying there that a common mistake for founders is they'll maybe focus too much on the features. And I can get that, because the features could be different to their competitors. So the features are their differentiators. How do you get those? How do you get the best of both worlds, where you're keeping it simple and it's not long and drawn out and boring and complicated, but it also shows the differentiators, because they seem to clash, at least in my mind.
Yeah, they can. I focus not on what the product does, but on the problem it is solving. It's kind of a constant course correction as you have discussions. But I mean, you want to know, as someone who's working on the product, I want to know what it does for sure. I'll sit through those conversations because that's part of the job. But I can't ask potential vendors or potential customers to sit through those conversations as well. So I find often metaphors are really good. They project if you can find a way to personify the problems and make it kind of express it that way, that's where the creative process comes in. By creative process, I don't mean artistic process. I just mean pondering, okay, how can we say this in a way that's going to be, different than all the competition I've seen? What will the tone be? And you can make the features very comprehensible if people want to learn about them. And the way you do that is just give them something at the very beginning, lets them know, okay, they're talking about me. Like, I can see myself in this metaphor they're making. I know what that's like. And that's done through research. A lot of times I find long form interviews with users or customers or potential customers talking about their with indirect questions, because direct questions tend to give you very biased answers. So ideally, it's an ongoing conversation with open-ended questions, and eventually you can guide them to the right topic. But then they're not answering a question; they're simply talking about what it is you need them to talk about, but they're not answering a direct question, because people have all sorts of cognitive biases about what they will say or won't say or can remember or can't remember. But it tends to eventually you get that little part of truth that you're looking for if you allow them to play with their ideas and go out and do it that way. And then what I do is I take them, and I can do, now with AI it's a lot faster, but do cluster analyses, and you find these words and trends and what people are saying about what's out there. So if they keep using words like cumbersome or impractical or things like that, well, that's a trend. That's a word that means that's something that many people are expressing about their tools and what they use and about the market. So if indeed the product does solve these problems, which it should, then you can really focus on those and create some sort of a character or some sort of an image that is that metaphor that says, oh, okay, because I find metaphors tend to be the best way to, like, the best way to explain things are simple, familiar images. So everybody's familiar with things like farms and, like accounting. I wrote a book about a farm that's kind of a accounting book too, because again, if you start off complicated, if you start off your pitch by the way my accounting textbook began, with a Nordstrom balance sheet with things I'd never heard of, like deferred asset, tax base, whatever, does that tell me anything if I'm on page 1 of an accounting book? No, I don't know what that means, but I know it's an asset. But if you started off with like a barn and a farm, well, I know what that is. Everyone knows what that is. Pitchforks, hay, cows, then those can be your inventory. Or if you're selling milk, your property, plant, and equipment are your cows. If you're selling meat, then inventory. You see what I mean? Like, so why start off with that massive balance sheet that's not going to explain anything when you can start off very simple with a metaphor? In this case, well, I guess it's not even a metaphor because you could use it as an actual example. But that would be one way to use, I guess, story form to explain a complicated topic. But that's not the kind of story form I use.
Yeah.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, well, I can see why that would be really effective. But I also know that it's not that common, and founders sometimes lean away from that style of communication. Why do you think they do that? Why do you think sometimes founders default to facts and features rather than more of a story like you just mentioned?
Well, it's what they know. And there's also a lot of insecurity with, using complicated big words because they don't want to, because they think that simple sounds simpleton. But it's very hard. I would, I think it's much harder to make things simple than it is to make things complicated. I think we all start off complicated naturally. We have complexity biases inborn to all of us, which is why if I ask people, 3, 6, 9, 12, please finish out. I got this wrong the first time too. I said 15, 18, 21. No, the most simple answer is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're just ascending numbers, but we automatically default to a more complex answer because that's where we are. So the question may be, well, then if that's the default, why not go with that? Well, if you do go with that, then how are you ever going to differentiate yourself from anybody if you always go with the default? So I challenge them, you say, Albert Einstein said the genius is in simplifying the complex, not in making it more complicated. Sophisticated is, or what is it? Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, was Da Vinci. There's a lot of psychological and artistic, genius quotes about it, but I just challenge them to I'll take what they've written, maybe rewrite it and say, does this say the same thing? And it's oftentimes we'll take words like effectively accelerate to just say faster, or so things like that. It's a lot of times it's hard to do that because if you're not using big words and complicated slides, then your product can't be sophisticated or complicated. But I just say, look at Apple. When I got my first Apple computer, I didn't even need instructions. It was that intuitive. I just started using it. I didn't have to know how anything worked. I just knew that it worked.
Yeah, definitely. One of the other things that you've done is with your work at Confer Technologies, you helped cut an acquisition timeline from 7 years to 2. How did you do that?
Well, I didn't know I did that until recently. And I like to talk about that case because a lot of other people I've worked with are still operating, and I don't really like to get into the details of their business because, I just don't, maybe they've changed or pivoted, and I don't want to say anything I'll regret. I use discretion basically, but that company got acquired and then reacquired, so I can talk about it all day long. And it was one of the first ones I did. The way it worked was I didn't believe, when I first heard that, I said, well, that can't be all. I mean, it had to be a good product. It was a good product, and they had a good team. So what he was saying was it accelerated the timeline, because when they would go to sell, when they would go to like meet prospects or send out material for prospects, they would reply a lot faster, and they all wanted to know, how did you make that? Like, where did that come from? What was that? They'd never seen anything like it. So when they walked into the room, he said, every room we walked into was very warm because people already understood what we were selling. They understood why they needed to buy it. And they just wanted to talk about, how did you make that video you made? That we'd never seen anything like that. And so it sort of opened the carpet to walking into the room and not having to deal with the committee of buyers who are going to be right out of the gate. They're, it's like an audition. They're usually sort of sitting there with their arms crossed and one eyebrow up, like waiting for the wrong thing to be said, so they can just cancel the meeting. But if they can walk in and the room's really nice and they want to get to know you and they think that they get, most importantly, it's not about, the video was fun to watch. It was that the value was so clear that they didn't have to really explain it. They just had to take questions sort of already moving along the funnel into the middle and bottom of it without having to hover around the top, making presentation after presentation. And I think he even said something to the effect of it saved us from ourselves or something, because they didn't have to go in and sell it. They could just go. There are a lot of engineers that said engineers are not good at the talking part. We're good at the building. So that's how that worked, was that it was just again, it was simple, different. In that market of fear, it was very light and sort of optimistic. It even started off sort of like with a Monty Python type gag almost, but yeah, I didn't, when I found that out, that it had been that impactful, I thought, well, maybe I should do this, because all these different CTOs and CEOs have said, how come you don't do this and only this? I just said I didn't know it was an option. So
yeah, totally.
When you're talking about impact there, how are you measuring whether a GTM message is actually working beyond things like impressions and clicks? Like, what are you measuring outside of that?
Depending on the product, I'd like to, if it's something that's done through a sales team, it's different than if it's done through a website. And usually these larger sales cycle items no one goes to a website just to buy the product. They maybe want to learn a little bit more about it and contact sales. So the way I look at it is, because there's no hard metric, you look at things like, I talk to the sales team, are their call times going down, but are they still making the same amount or more deals? Which means that the leads are better, that they're getting better leads. They're not wasting time on, and a lot of times I work with sales on the go-to-market message based on customer feedback. What are they saying? They're in the vanguard. They're in the trenches, with these customers every day, listening to everything they say. So I often work with them. I try to find some sort of metric that is known at the time, and then see how it is, use that as the KPI, so that there's some way to measure it, be it call times, be it click-through rates, be it retention, be it adoption. Usually it'll pan out over a couple months to start to see accelerated adoption. Or at one place it was amount of, they would lease out spaces for something complicated I won't get into, but what is their utilization rates? And it was up to 100. So it couldn't possibly have gone to market any better. So those are, I try to find metrics, because I don't want to just be using soft, squishy numbers. I like to find something that is solid and use that, because it's nice to measure things, especially in a business setting. You want to show ROI. It can't just be, it feels good, or it makes us, we like it. It can't just be that. So I like to see like deals closed. What is the expected rate? What will this, what could exceed those expectations?
Yeah. Probably one of the trends that you might have seen in B2B tech at the moment is they commonly like to hire people that have been in B2B tech for their whole career,
Mm-hmm.
And they're very narrow with their experience. Why do you believe hiring someone with such an outside perspective is actually an advantage?
Depending on what the goal is, I think if you're hiring people just from the industry, you're really going to get the same type of tactics, and it's hard to look at something from that 30,000-foot view with that outsider look, and I think that's why fractional work is so great, is that you can come in, make an impact, and then move on. And they can get people who maybe have done field marketing in B2B tech, and they want someone with 5-10 years experience. That's great too. I'm happy to work with people like that. But I find that people focus too much on things like they want someone with product-led growth experience. Well, what does that mean? That means they've worked on products that are easy to use, easy to onboard, and can be given. Product-led growth is just another way to say free samples, right? That's really all it is, free samples. So if you've worked with easy-to-use products, then you have a lot of product-led growth experience. But then you've only worked in that, and you've only worked with easily understood, onboarded products. You don't have much of a diversity. So I don't like to. I just find the want to just have people who worked in this field for a long, long time is pretty myopic. I always try to work with people that's why I like working with engineers, because I'm not one. I just learn every time I do and get their perspective, which is very different than mine.
Yeah, definitely. How much of that is part of your role when you're working with companies? Like how much of, especially the initial month or two when you're working with companies, how much time are you actually spending learning the product, speaking to the engineer, and really going outside of the marketing department to help do your job better?
I'd say quite a lot in the beginning. If I'm the first marketing hire, or there's maybe a couple junior level employees working in marketing, I really, that's one of the first things I do, because I want everyone to understand, what it's really important for people to understand what marketing can do, what it can't do, what it is, what it isn't, and what is their understanding of the product. Because if I get 10 different answers from different people, then that's a problem. There needs to be consolidation there. Again, something that everyone can understand. So I will go to the different departments, explain to them in terms they understand. So the way I explain it to the legal department is very different than the procurement department, is very different than the sales, et cetera, because you want to meet them on their turf and explain things in ways they can understand. And even, there are so many acronyms nowadays and so many different phrases and lingo that it's starting to overlap between fields, where, lead optimization means one thing to us, it means something different to the R&D team. And so you have to be really careful about the words you use and make sure that I'm not saying something that actually means something in this other field. So I just, at the risk of being really slow, I just say, like, okay, that acronym, what does that mean to you? And oftentimes GTM means Google Tag Manager. I'm like, okay, well, that's not what I was hired to do. So let's take a step back.
Yeah, I can get that. What are a couple of things that you've been keeping an eye on in the last few years in your industry?
AI, I should be more specific. AI, who hasn't? But video AI is something I've been really curious to see, and so far, okay. But I'm still waiting for something that's not guesswork. And there's some AI video out there that's really great, and you can tell the people using it understand production, understand editing and pacing and things like that. Most of the time, though, it's just people creating 8-second clips of stuff, and I don't know what the point is. Like, they're really excited, and I'm glad to see they're excited about, like, video, but I just want to, like, call and be like, you do have to have something to say. Like, you can't just be a dog running across a floor. 8 seconds of that. It's like, all right. I mean, I've seen people make documentaries that just fall flat because they're really focused on how fast and easy it was, but there are a lot of good things out there that are not meant to be fast and easy. So, I look at AI video and I see it and I'm like, the focus shouldn't be on fast and easy. It should be on, the angles you use, the story you're telling. Is it the best way to get there? Yeah. So for the same reason I don't vibe code, I would encourage people not to just vibe produce, because it's a lot of guesswork. I want a guy on a mountain. That's not what I was picturing, but okay, good enough.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the point. It should be really, you have an idea in your head, make it happen for just like you had it in your head.
Yeah. Do you think in, say, 2 years from now, do you think using AI to create your videos, especially if you're a small company with limited resources, is 10 times out of 10 going to be the best way to do it?
No, nope. Because it doesn't give you any constraints. When you can have anything you want, your creative is going to suffer, because creativity requires constraints. A lot of the best examples of, the movie, I like to use the movie Jaws because everyone's seen it, I assume.
Yeah.
That movie was a showcase in constraints that worked out, because the shark didn't work. In a movie about a shark, that's a pretty big constraint. But then they had to come up with creative ways to make you scared. And they were seeing people's legs in the water, it scares me to death. Or those barrels that would pop up when the shark was around. Oh, it scared me to death. And then the barrels would disappear. It scared me to death again. But if it was just seeing the shark over and over, it wouldn't have been as effective a movie. That's what I mean about, people are making videos alone. It's a team sport. There's actors, there's all sorts of contributions. And if you could just imagine it and then type it and then get it, you're not going to have that struggle that you need to have in some way. Somewhere along the way, if you get everything you want, it generally, that's a lot of big budget movies are really bad because they just pump and chump and move out these movies, and they didn't have to really struggle with it. And I think every good creation has to have some struggle, even if it's just redoing it or remaking it or something. But if here's the big problem is you have to know what good looks like. So again, I don't vibe code because I don't know what good code looks like. So I wouldn't attempt to make it. So just taking time to really understand what is good, what does good look like, and then trying to aspire to that. That plus AI, that will be 10 out of 10. But I look at it like CGI. It's not going to make a movie for you, but it's going to make the movie amazing if you use it the right way. Don't use it too much and don't use it too little.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point about creative stuff, because when you look at, or certainly for me, when I think about movies, when I think about music especially, it seems like it's all peaked quite a while ago and we've been a bit downhill since, even though there's more opportunity, like it's easier to record music, for example. It's probably easier to make a movie than it was 20, 30 years ago, but the quality isn't getting better. So if obviously we're continuing to follow that trend where things are easier, things are more convenient, things are cheaper, and that's great in many ways. But do you think we'll still continue to see a decrease in the actual quality? Because all of that seems counterintuitive. You know what I mean?
It is. I think there is some good stuff out there. It's just that as we go look at it, if we go backwards in time to a day when there were three. I mean, I don't even know if I know this world, but there were 3 channels. And then if you got HBO, you had apparently an extra box next to your cable box. That was all people had, and a movie would come out. Now we have Netflix and Amazon and all the different cable channels. And we've gone through such an evolution. There's just a lot of different channels. And so it's almost like a cone. As you go back in time, there are a few brand names. Now everything's a remake or a reboot or a remake of the reboot of the remake. Like Star Trek, the Star Trek, I guess. It's like that was 10 years ago or more. And they've remade all sorts of stuff because there's less brand names to recognize. But yeah, you do have a lot more content out there. You have a lot more garbage out there. And it's hard to find, we don't have that common experience of, everyone at the water cooler, everyone watched Friends or Seinfeld. There's really not that many shows like that. Maybe Stranger Things or Breaking Bad was the last one. I think that people were, and even that was only 13 million people out of a nation of 300 million people. So we don't have that. It's hard to know what the good ones are because we don't have them. I don't know. I haven't watched the Oscars in ages, but we just don't have that common experience. And also the barriers of entry are much lower. So what's on YouTube, you can put anything on YouTube. And that just brings me to the word content itself, which is such a sanitized, weird word for art. I'm a content creator. It's like, was Beethoven a notes arranger? I didn't, just content's this broad word to mean anything, which is what we get now. So I think there are great things out there, but there's just a lot more things out there. So it's hard to find them. And a lot of I don't go to the movies much anymore. Remember when we were younger, the movies were like the prestige and the TV was just, whatever. Now I look at the TV as more prestige and the movies are 2.5 hours long. I'm going to have to get up at some point. It's like, who wants to sit there except for Top Gun Maverick? That's really cool, 2.5 hours. But most of the time, about an hour 40 minutes, I'm like, okay, can we wrap this up? Enough. But it's you'll see a lot less risk taking from out of Hollywood anyway. A lot less risk taking. I wouldn't be surprised to see Tylenol the movie because at least people know the name. It's coming, but there are some really good. I'm watching Pluribus right now. It's a great show. It's almost like the X-Files if you used to watch that way back when. God freaking. But there are some good stuff, but there's just so much stuff. It's hard to just spin the wheel and watch a show. I always want to ask, has anyone seen this? Is it good? Because I've spent too many hours getting to that 10th episode and be like, if this ends with that girl being the one who did it because of this, I'm going to be really disappointed. And it's like, that girl did it because of this. I'm like, what was the point? So, that's going to keep happening until, but that movie Everywhere, All at Once, that was pretty new.
Everyone said to watch that. Everyone said that was really good.
I got through most of it, but I was like, all right, this movie needs to be watched again when I can pay attention. It's one of those movies you're like, if you don't look, you're like, wait, where are they now? Galaxies. But there are movies like that, and they'll continue to be, and great shows too. They just it's just harder to find them because we don't have that common. I don't know if it's like that in every other country, but I'm assuming it is.
I think so. In the tech marketing world, has there been anything recently that you've thought, oh wow, they did a good job on that?
In the tech marketing world, I would say it's tricky because a lot of the stuff I look into is like behind the scenes stuff, but I will say I've been a little bit perplexed by some of the reactions to some things, like that iPad commercial, I guess a year ago, when they crushed an iPad and everyone freaked out. And it really, I didn't understand. I was like, they're not actually destroying music. They're trying to say something. Maybe they didn't say it the best way, but it showed me that, how do I put this? Creative ideas are often seem to be owned by people claiming to be creative, but they're creative in title only. And so really creative stuff, I look at from every field and try and incorporate it into tech if I can, but it's hard to find because I think people don't understand that creativity is just a way of doing things. It's not a talent that, it's not for artists alone. I've met many artists. I used to play piano and I met a lot of artists who weren't creative at all. People think they are. Like, I play piano, but that's not an art. That's not creative. It's a craft. It's a skill. The way I play it can be creative if I'm trying new things, live, especially because I'm live. And there's no going back. Once you start with this new pedal, you're going to have to keep playing it. And you put yourself out there, and you can get some good sounds. But yeah, I find that people that don't understand creativity tend to stifle it. And so I see a lot of tech. What I have noticed is SaaS websites and SaaS marketing, it really does say the same thing a lot, but it's all about leveraging AI-centric platforms to optimize something. I feel like that's the same thing I see all the time. So I would love, if everyone has examples, I'd love to see a really great marketing campaign that didn't use the same hero and the same same words over and over. Like, don't mention your ARR. So yeah, that's kind of part of the process of working with people, is I make them explain the product, but without telling me what it is. Like, never, as soon as they say what, I'm like, that's what, and it turns into a Pulp Fiction, like, say what again type of thing. Because if you're just focusing on what, then no one's going to really want to learn why or how.
Yeah, definitely. When do you think should a startup start investing in go-to-market messaging? And is there a specific revenue stage or milestone that it makes?
Well, ideally, they shouldn't be spending money on it, but they should be thinking about it early on. That's why I like to do like 30-minute free calls with people, just to let them know, here are the things you should be thinking about as you develop this product. But I would say once I can only speak for myself. Once you have a few customers and you've got a viable product that definitely is solving a problem, and I say customers because they're good sources of research, but and you also have revenue also to actually invest without borrowing. But yeah, I would say when you have products and you're ready to sort of scale up and sort of really when I say go to market, I mean like launch publicly and start looking for other customers, not necessarily funding, but actual customers.
Yeah. What advice would you give to a founder whose product is really strong, but their prospects just don't quite get it?
Well, I'd say call me, but otherwise, try to think about how do you explain this to someone who does not have your expertise, and work with someone who doesn't have that expertise and try and explain it to them like a sibling, or even better, a parent. I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of explaining how the cloud works to your folks, but I have. It's like, no, it's not an actual, okay, forget that word. You're going to attach it with the paperclip. But once you do that, then you'll start to see like how difficult it is. And I'm guilty of the same thing. People have asked me for like, could you explain, music or this chord thing? And I'll start explaining it, but I start explaining way too far because I don't know how to get back to, okay, C major. It's hard to do. It's the curse of expertise, really. That is for people not to get it. You have to really and I'm guilty of this for myself too. I ask people all the time, what is the one, when I ask for feedback, I never ask for general feedback. I'm like, what's one thing I could do better this week? What's one thing I could have done better on that call? Be real specific. so that you don't leave them to their own imagination. So if they're finding people aren't getting it, I like to just ask, well, why? What is it they're not getting? And let me read it. Let me tell you what it says to me. Because again, who are their customers? When they say prospects, are they actually prospecting customers, or are they prospecting users? There's a big difference between the customer, the user, the buyer, the stakeholder. That's the complex. A lot of times I see founders will talk to other people as though they are also engineers and they are also users of this technology. A lot of times they're just the buyer of the technology. They're not ever going to use it. So how do you explain it to that person who's probably a finance guy and not necessarily a tech expert? So it's just, again, going back to like TV days, is understanding the audience, understanding like what is their language, and then meeting them on their terms, because they're not going to come to you. You're always going to them and trying to prove why, you don't have to go to IBM. You don't have to go to IBM to save your job. You can actually take a chance on this new option, and here's why. And so if you have a tight, solid message and story, I just want to address this real quick. Story is not a story in terms of like, when I talk about a product story, I simply mean what is the thing that makes its value the most clear and in the most plain way. That's all a story really is. It's a way of connecting emotionally, but not through characters and arcs and 3-act structures and things like that. It's the most overused word, but really whatever anyone says, like, oh, tell its story, or they say create compelling content, I always like to follow up with how, because that part they never get into. You'll see it everywhere. Create compelling. That's like saying write a good song. Okay, write a good song. Go write a good song. Well, okay, how do I do that? Well, it's not easy, but they just say it like it's, oh yeah, go out and create interesting content for your audience. Like, well, okay, how do I do that? So there is a way, but I'm not going to get into it here. It takes a while, but it's not just a matter of understanding your customer like that. It takes a long time to understand a customer. So that's basically the advice I give.
Yeah, makes sense. Gianna, any closing questions or comments?
No, it's been very insightful. Thank you, Mike.
Glad you liked it.
And for anyone listening, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you?
You can find me on LinkedIn at Mike Terlizzi, Terlizzi. And really from there, it takes you to my website, thesimplemarketing.com. But that's really the hub I use for all my stuff is reach out and connect. I'd be happy to, connect with anyone.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for taking the time to join us today, Mike. And for the audience, thanks for tuning in, and see you in the next one.
All right. Bye, everyone.